Good morning, everyone. My name is Beatriz Garcia Nice, project lead for the Gender-Based Violence Project here at the Wilson Center and program associate for the Latin American program. I would like to welcome you all to this morning's event, A New Threat to Women in Politics, Online Gender-Based Violence. As we begin to wrap up our International Women's Month programming here at the center, we wanted to focus on new technologies during this month. During this conversation, we will discuss the role of new technologies and how they are transforming the way we engage as societies. Unfortunately, the digital realm has also become an increasingly violent space, especially for women, faced with the decision of having to choose between their personal aspirations and their personal security, especially in countries suffering from democratic backsliding, authoritarian regimes, and increased levels of violence. For this morning event, I would like to first introduce our CEO and President, Ambassador Mark Green, who will be providing introductory remarks for this event. I would like to take this opportunity to thank him for his support on the programming that the Center has accomplished during this International Women's Month. Ambassador Green, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Bea. Thanks so much, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening to all of you who are joining us from around the world. As we all know, March is International Women's Month, and it really is an opportunity for us all to reflect on the critical role that women play in our society. But it's also an opportunity to step back, a chance to take stock of the challenges and opportunities for women empowerment all around the world. To be clear, women empowerment isn't about women, or at least not solely about women. It's about making the world more prosperous, more democratic, and more just. It reflects our firm view that no society can be truly successful if it isn't listening to and tapping into half its population. In the last decade, we've seen women's participation in public life increasing, and that is, of course, a very hopeful and optimistic trend. At the same time, the spread of new technologies is transforming how we access information and the ways in which we engage each other. On the darker side, this digital realm can become a space for violence, with women often bearing the brunt of hateful speech and threats to their safety. Nearly half of women in Arab states who use the internet report feeling unsafe from their online interactions. Across Ukraine and Russia, women activists are increasingly subjected to online bullying and harassment. And in Latin America, one of the most violent regions in the world for women, female political candidates continue to be socially stigmatized and threatened. In light of these rising global issues, we're joined today by a distinguished panel of female public figures from each of these regions. They'll help us explore ways in which women in the public eye can be better protected against online attacks and online intimidation. Here at the Wilson Center, we're scholarship-driven and we're fiercely nonpartisan. And so we hope our programs can help shape the conversation for policymakers and practitioners on the ways in which we can fight gender-based violence in all of its forms. And this really is for the sake of women, to be sure, but again, really for the sake of all of us. So with that, thanks again to our panelists, and thanks to all of you for tuning in, if you will, to this very important discussion. Paulina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Green. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our panel discussion, A New Threat to Women in Politics, Online Gender-Based Violence. Thank you to the Wilson Center Latin America Program, the Middle East Program, and the Keenan Institute for hosting this important discussion on a pressing issue that transcends borders and affects women in every corner of the globe. Today, as Ambassador Green said, we are honored to be joined by three distinguished panelists who bring invaluable expertise and insight into this discussion. First, we have Saina Erheim, a renowned Middle East media and gender consultant whose work sheds light on the unique challenges faced by women in the region. Next, we are privileged to have Katia Gonzalez, a former senator from Paraguay, whose first-hand experience in politics offers invaluable perspectives on navigating online violence. And finally, we welcome Ana Rivina, the founder and director of the Abuse Problem Resolution Center, Nazilu.net, whose organization works tirelessly to combat gender-based violence in Russia. Thank you for being with us today. Just a quick note, the conversation will be mostly held in English, but some portions will be in Spanish, so interpretation is provided. Make sure to adjust your settings so you don't miss anything from our important conversation. In recent years, we have witnessed a remarkable increase in women's participation in public life. However, this advancement has not come without its challenges. One of the most alarming threats facing women in politics today is the pervasive issue of online gender-based violence. This is not a new phenomenon, but fortunately, as Beatriz was saying, digital realm has become an increasingly violent space, and new technologies now pose new threats and challenges. I would like to kick our discussion by offering our panelists the opportunity to share their experiences with us. Zaina, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and how online violence has impacted your life and the women on your region, please?
Thank you for having me. But before that, while you were speaking, I was thinking about the different layers that we need also to take into consideration when we're handling this topic. If the women who are in public sphere or online are actually provoking propaganda or are pro the mainstream, they get much more less harassment if they are human rights defenders or if they are trans or if they're advocating for things that are not acceptable. So, I mean, the gender of the activist does bring more aggressive and aggression, but also we need to think about the intersectional effects of what they're saying, how they're saying it, and what platform they're actually using for that. So after this note, as a journalist, as a woman who is against the status quo, who is against the patriarchy and as providing a feminist perspective, I think the combination of both my gender and what I do was the reason for like a huge amount of gaslighting campaigns, systematic, organized, which eventually succeeded in a way in silencing me. I stopped writing in my mother tongue language in Arabic. I haven't been working on my country, Syria, for over 5 years. I've been working in different countries in the region, but I avoid consciously working on anything related to my country. This is all a kind of effect, and I'm very powerful, and I already live privileged to be having a refugee status in the UK. I'm kind of protected. So imagine the kind of lesson that all of these young women journalists who are still in the region are getting. As you mentioned, I think the online spaces are just reflective of our offline, but while our streets, we're facing harassment in the streets, we have a local law. Within the online spaces, we have commercial companies who only care about the kind of revenues that they're getting from us being harassed. So we can't really complain, we can't really follow up, not to mention that we're actually being institutionally silenced. Recently, a couple of posts that I post on my feminist page about Palestinian filmmakers who are feminists were blocked because anything that's related to Palestine is being blocked on Facebook. This is also something we need to think about and speak about in our conversation.
Thank you. We will definitely explore more of that topic in the coming minutes. Now, Katia, I would like to go with you. Gracias por estar con nosotros, Katia. Cuéntanos de tu
Thank you for being with us today. Tell us about your experience. You were a senator in Paraguay. We're talking about a region that increasingly attacks women, or we see these kinds of attacks against candidate women who aspire to participating in the public life of their country. Tell us a little bit about your experience and how that has impacted in your decision in terms of working in politics or leaving politics. Well, first, when it comes to the Paraguayan context, we see with great concern that these dynamics of violence in the digital sphere are on an upward trend. Protected by radicalized political groups, even some legislators that openly go against women in politics, journalists, without censure or control. And that makes the current environment to be very violent and hide behind false news and intent to damage. And that can derive in tragedies in the future as well. When it comes to the personal impact that this had, it was brutal. Imagine that politicians from the government party and their allies have created a fierce campaign based on the digital realm and the media tied to Horacio Cartes, a former president of the Republic and currently president of the government party, disseminating hate campaigns and based on lies against me. These campaigns were at the base of my expulsion from the Senate on February 14th this year. In 4 hours and 21 minutes without a right to defend myself, violating the internal regulations of the upper chamber, in spite of my being the fourth senator with the greatest number of votes when I was elected, and without having fulfilled a full year's term. So the impact was brutal.
Muchas gracias, Katia, por compartirnos esta experiencia. Hablaremos más, por
Thank you,
supuesto,
Katia, for sharing your experience. We will talk about how this is having an impact not only in Paraguay, but in the entire Latin American region. Let's go with Anna.
To share your experience with us, what you've seen in Russia, and also in the context you have worked on. You were sharing with us before the event that you are no longer living in Russia, but tell us about what you've seen in different contexts in that region.
Yes, thank you for having me. I want to start from the point that these 2 last years, it changed so many things that now we even don't have this discussion about women's rights or gender-based violence. First of all, we still don't have legal frames for this conversation. And also we face the problem that inside of the country, all people and organizations which are against the war, they're enemies inside of Russia. For example, my organization is foreign agent, and I'm also a foreign agent by my own. And that's why we face a lot of problems from the government, from the state. And at the same time, we are Russians abroad. That's why we also face a lot of problems, because for many people, it's better not to deal with us. And if we speak about online services, online problems, I can speak about not my own experience, but about victims of domestic violence, first of all, because we don't have all these online tools which we had before. For example, it's even not possible to pay for Zoom in Russia. And my organization tries to work online for a whole country. And of course, we cannot work everywhere just by personal. It should be by online, and it's not possible. Secondly, for example, my organization has an application where you can ask for help inside this application. For the first 6 months, we had problems with Apple Store to prove the fact that we are not enemies and that we need to give this help to these women. And of course, the main problem is that now we have this conservative turn inside of Russia, and the government, the state, decides that now women should keep silence and they should go through all of these problems. And we see terrible increase of violence from people who come from the war. And that's also problems we should solve it somehow, but there is no legal frames, there is no conversation inside of the country, and all services are not with us, they are against us, unfortunately. That's the main points for the start.
Thank you, Anna. Obviously, what has happened for the last 2 years in Russia and Ukraine has had a big impact, and in so many ways of life, but also in this realm. So we will explore that a little bit further. But I like to turn the conversation now into new technologies. We are now obviously relying increasingly on new platforms. We use social media every day. So what is the role that new technologies that these digital platforms, maybe social media, are playing in these attacks and this online violence against women in politics. Saina, you are a journalist, you're based in London. I would like to start with you and your experience, what you've seen so far in this topic.
Well, thank you. And I think we can have a competition about how much we're being sanctioned and how much we're going. I mean, refugee and then Muslim and then Syrian. I'm afraid you're just at the beginning of the road. There's still lots of black shit to witness. In terms of the platforms in 2011, when the uprisings in the Middle East region started against the authoritarian regimes, we thought of them as a way of liberation because they are mainly based and managed in a democratic country in the US, which is providing itself as the protector of the human rights. That gradually has changed, whether it's related to like sexism, patriarchy, even we've seen in Myanmar and other regions, or even Palestine, the kind of censorship and kind of authoritarian regime being applied again within that social media system. It started with Facebook before it occurred Instagram. Lots of women were not even using their pictures. They were not even using their real names. I've interviewed some women who were like literally on the ground countering extremism and fighting jihadists and doing this amazing work. And when I told them that, can I post your video or your interview online? They were like, no, we're scared of the comments. They were much more scared of those virtual people online rather than the actual harassers who have weapons on the ground, because a very tiny misinformation that could spread online or a fake picture of a woman could easily get her killed. And we've seen that in an area in Syria where a man killed his sister because someone posted that she had committed an adultery. Again, queer people or queer women face even extra challenges whenever they're posting anything, even if it's related to politics, even like a personal picture. So unlike the cis men, women face lots of personalized campaigns, gaslighting, digging into anything that you can do could be taken against you. If you're having a beer, if you are walking with your friends, if you're dancing, such things makes your actual life unbearable because you're always looking around and seeing what's happened. Once there was a YouTube video for someone against me, and he was literally threatening to kill me and my family. And it took YouTube more than 24 hours to put it down. I like literally flagged it. Many people flagged it. It has my full name on it. And then I was so furious. And then I was trying to lead a campaign of human rights defenders, trying to ask all those big companies to have a regulation committee that can monitor this. But eventually, again, this is a business for them. And attacking me, whether it's sexist, whether it's patriarchy, whatever, it's just giving them more money. So to be frank, I'm not optimistic at this stage when I'm being approached by a young activist who is planning to stand up for elections or whatever. I mean, we've seen what happened with the women who stood for elections in Iraq. Literally every single one of them was attacked with things that are related to sexual or private, or most of them were fake. So I would tell her that this is the consequences. And if you're not ready to do it, and if you are scared that your third cousin is going to kill you, just don't. Sadly, if I was saying this to myself 10 years ago, I would have silenced me. But this is our reality now.
Thank you, Anna. I'm wondering what you think about this, especially with the progress that we've seen in the digital realm. I mean, we obviously talk about social media. We see the attacks happening there, the harassment, abuse, all the insults that are thrown, especially to women in politics. But also now with generative artificial intelligence, spyware. I mean, I'm wondering if you are seeing this getting worse from maybe 2 years ago, or how are the new challenges with these new technologies? What do you see?
I think that these technologies, they work with people and with people's attitude to any kind of problems. First of all, I want to say, maybe not everybody knows, but in Russia, you should use VPN, a special service, to get all this information from Facebook, from Instagram, from all social networks. And also there is a big problem with independent media. They're almost all of them are not in the country anymore, and you cannot deal with them. Even if you support them, it should be criminal punishment for that. So first problem is that people literally cannot get information safely, and there is a huge risk. Secondly, if they are ready to cooperate with this media to spread the information and to speak about that, it also could be criminal punishment for that. And third part is that we feel that this conservative turn inside of the country, with all these traditional values, with all these family issues, it brought another level of shame for women, shame for everything. It doesn't matter what you do. If you support like feminist, it should be not good. It should be something. I'm not sure that they will make these changes very quick. But we already know that last year in Russia, LGBT community became illegal according to a Russian court. Supreme Court. So it's quite close to do the same thing with ideas of child-free, independent of women who are not support the war, for example, against these traditional values, which are not traditional for us. They are not real. And because of that, of course, we didn't have this culture to speak about women's problem, but now it became much harder because it's another level of this pressure. And if people go abroad and they try to be these voices of these women, the society inside of the country recognize them as enemies. Not, of course, all of them. I'm talking about people who support Putin, this regime. They recognize these people as enemies who are not talking about truth things, and they try to explain that this is enemies of the country and they want to ruin it somehow. And if you're inside of the country, you literally can do almost nothing, because for each reason they will find some tools to punish you. And of course, it's based on huge level of scare which people cannot avoid. And women, of course, because we understand that in all these situations, women are more vulnerable.
Of course. Katia, cuéntanos de lo que pasa en América Latina. Vemos que las
Katia,
redes
tell us
sociales, por
about what
supuesto, cada vez tienen
happens
un
in Latin
papel
America. We
más
see that
importante
social
en las
networks and
campañas
platforms
políticas,
are
tenemos estos
playing
temas
a
de
more significant role
comunicación,
in political
vemos una
campaigns and
gran presencia de
communication
los
schemes.
candidatos en redes
We see a
sociales,
great
pero también
presence of
vemos que ahí es en
candidates
donde
in
se
social
llevan a
networks,
cabo
but we
pues
also
muchos
see
de
that
estos
that is
ataques,
where
mucha de esta
many of these
violencia en
attacks are
contra
happening. A
de
lot
las
of this
candidatas, de las
violence
mujeres que
against
se desarrollan en
women,
política. ¿Hay
female
algún tipo de
candidates in
mecanismo de
politics. Is there some
protección? ¿Hay
sort
algún
of
tipo de
protection
medidas
mechanism?
desde
Is
el
there any kind
gobierno, desde
of
alguna otra
measure
instancia se esté
that
tomando
the
para
government
proteger
or
la
some other
integridad y la
agency is
seguridad de
undertaking
las
to protect the
candidatas
integrity and
que
safety
reciben
and
estos ataques?
security of women who are receiving these attacks?
Bueno, la pregunta es muy interesante y es importante
Well, that is a
señalar
very
que los
interesting
espacios de
question. It's very
protección
important to
en
point
Paraguay
out
son
that
muy
protection spaces
limitados,
in
por no decir
Paraguay are very
inexistentes.
limited
Y quiero
and
explicar
rather
un poco,
non-existent.
hoy la
I'd
situación
like
país
to say the following. Today,
en
the
Paraguay es un
country
caso de
situation in
análisis que merece
Paraguay is a
toda la
case for
atención. En
analysis
Paraguay se
that
está
deserves all of our
desenvolviendo en una
attention. In
dinámica de un
Paraguay,
modelo
we are
autoritario
seeing a
cuyas
dynamic
características
happen
son, tenemos
for an
un partido
authoritarian
hegemónico
regime. We have a
atrincherado en
hegemonic
el poder por
party
más de 70
that
años,
has been in
donde más
power
de la
for over
mitad
70
fue una
years, where
dictadura militar,
for
la
over
más
half of
longeva
that,
de
it was a
Latinoamérica, que hoy
military
está
dictatorship.
demostrando justamente
And
su
today it
necesidad
is
de volver
demonstrating
a esas
its
mismas
needs to
lógicas,
go back to that
haciendo de
same
la
logic
represión, la
based
criminalización de la
on
protesta,
repression,
del
criminalization of
desfinanciamiento de políticas
protests,
sociales
the
sensibles, el control
definancing of
absoluto y el
sensible
uso del
policies,
monopolio de la
the absolute
fuerza en
control and
beneficio
the
de ellos.
monopoly
Esto es
of
parte
force for the
justamente
benefit
del
of
modelo de
just a few. So
ejercicio
this
del
is
poder
part of the
que hoy estamos viendo
power
en
exercise
gran
model
mayoría
that
de
we are
Paraguay.
seeing happen
Sabemos que
in
la
Paraguay.
participación de la
We
mujer en
know
política
that
es
the
también un
participation
signo de
of women
democracia.
in politics is also a sign of democracy within a government. And a government that rejects the democratic model does not have the priority of having women involved within their administration. On the contrary, the intent of the current administration, our president has had as one of his campaign discourses the elimination of the Ministry for Women, the elimination of agencies specialized in equity and gender, and the reduction of protection mechanisms. Right now, we are seeing their eventual derogation. So in this environment, we see that things are getting worse in the framework of political campaigns where institutions don't activate any sort of prevention or protection mechanism despite the audacity of that violence that is happening online and we've seen this around the world. Our colleagues from around the world are just telling us, and that can turn into a reality from virtual to reality. There's just a fine line.
And if you can tell us a little bit about how that works in your region, are there any protections in place to protect women and their right and their possibilities of running for office or participating in political life? Is this something that is being discussed perhaps with different stakeholders? What can you tell us about that?
I mean, one of the challenges with controlling or legalizing issues with online is that it is not controlled by regions or courts or like a specific non-commercial bodies. It is mainly led by businesses from around the globe, all based in one neighborhood in the US, which is mainly white, privileged, cis men. So, I mean, challenging this or putting anything into context needs to really speak about the origin of this. Who is putting those rules? It is those rich, white, cis men. Who is applying those rules? Same. Who are the ones who are supposed to be concerned about the breach of these rules? They are there. And I think the only time where we see any changes is if it's helping the kind of advocacy that they're doing, that they're providing the safe space for women or for non-binary people and queers. Until now, especially in the last decades, with the different with different shifts. I mean, within the MENA region, we've seen a shift from Facebook towards Twitter, and now there is a huge immigration toward TikTok because they're feeling it is safer. It's safer in terms of well, first, the censorship that the US applies on anything that's related to Palestine is not there. That was the first immigration there. And I mean, for the first time, we're seeing women who didn't dare to put their pictures on Facebook actually posting videos dancing on TikTok, which was, I mean, very unusual things. And now it is becoming accepted, especially within the younger generation. But again, who is controlling the rules on TikTok? What's happening? Recently, couple of women in Egypt were taken into courts because of videos posted on TikTok, which they were accused of corrupting the social norms. And one of them was sentenced for 7 years. But what could the social media platforms do? I mean, even the local government, which are patriarchal, which are a kind of authoritarian regimes, are using those tools, that online tools, to suppress the women. When we had a couple of years ago, what we call it our own Me Too movement, there were so many women speaking about the serious sexual harassers in the region. Well, the online spaces felt again like they're giving us this platform, but again, those perpetrators used the local laws and accused the women who were supporting the victims, the anonymous victims, of doing defamation, and they took them to the local courts. So, I mean, even if it's not those rulers in the US who are suppressing or neglecting the kind of violence that women are facing, then the local sexist governments are actually using those platforms as a justification to silence the women, to suppress them, and eventually push them away. And that's why we're seeing much more makeup influencer rather than journalists or human rights defenders who are advocating on social media as the main tool, because it is scary and they're not protected. And the kind of solidarity that they're getting is really minimum. And when they need to leave their countries, they don't have any support, no visas, no documents. They're completely left on their own, which means we're getting more and more into this sexist, cis men only spaces that has no space for women in the public sphere in general.
Saina, I'd like to follow up on that. What are the, I mean, this is very difficult, of course. There's a lack of protections from what you were saying. So what do you think are the long-term effects or the short-term effects even? Like, are you seeing more women reluctant to participate more in public life? Are you seeing some perhaps self-censorship? What are the impacts that you are seeing because of this lack of protections or legal frameworks who can actually protect the women who participate in public life?
Well, self-censorship has been going for so long. I mean, for me, I've been self-censoring myself for 7 years now. So that is going on. But even with self-censorship, you're still, whenever you're voicing any unpopular opinion or even defending another woman who is being under a violence attack online, then you're dragged into it again. I've seen lots of very powerful women human rights defenders leaving this internet spaces because they said, one of them is a very well-known Egyptian who was a leader in the movements. And I was shocked. She had like 4 million followers on Twitter on its own. When I told her, like, how could you leave this space for them? And she was like, I'm living only once. How much I'm going to be putting my body for them to eat? That's the kind of frame that she used. So that is, we're seeing now short term. In the long term, I think we're going to be seeing more kind of shallow discussion and kind of colonized, like a combination between colonized, shallow, capitalist kind of content being created by those women who dare to be in the public sphere, and everyone else is going to disappear into their own spaces.
Anna, I'd like to ask to you the same question about this protections, or if you've seen some mechanisms in place to protect women from online violence. Also, I mean, it looks like there's a general lack of these protections. And do you think that maybe a discussion between different stakeholders might contribute to advance on these topics and might contribute to put some measures in place to protect women?
I want to support Zaina. I want to say that there is a huge problem with solidarity, because we really see that all changes which women faced in their life were from this solidarity. We see all these waves of feminists, and we have these rights because of their connection. And I can say that now it's maybe not easy for us, not easy for women from Ukraine, but we try to have these bridges. We support women from Ukraine. They ask for help. We ask for their experience, for their opinion. And we do understand what the men's world look like, full of tears, full of wars. And I want to say to Zaina that also I'm Jewish. I'm in Israel now. And I understand what they have so many common problems. And it's also because it will be totally different if women speak to women about these problems, but we don't have this voice. We need to participate in it. We need to look at it. And also this is very huge problems that we always face new questions, how to put us not together, but from different parts. And it's not correct because it also has totally same system. And I want to say that the problem of family domestic violence has so many common with state violence. It always about control. It always about lack of opportunities to change something, lack of opportunities to speak about these changes. And if we speak about women in politics in Russia nowadays, we can see that all these women, they start to behave like these men do. They do not represent women. They do not speak about women's problem. They do not speak about their experience. And it happens everywhere when women are not involved in these solutions. And also we have experience of international law. And there are a lot of documents, and we see when women are involved in working on these bills, on these drafts, it has much more practice results, not only good words that were from peace, for democracy, not about that, how to deal with that. For example, the problem of sextortion, where women have to go from their home countries, where they are forced to find new place, and they need to go through all these borders, and they don't have money, and they need to give something, and they have only their body, and this men who have arm and weapon, they use it. So we see it even now, and it happens. So it's not about good words from UN. It's about the result, and we need to speak about this, how to deal with that on practice, how to recognize the problem, and not to try to show that everybody are trying to do something in it, but to find tools which really can be used.
For sure. In your experience, Anna, I'd like to follow up on that. Have you seen any measures that can be effective? Have you seen perhaps a discussion with several stakeholders about like some measures that could actually have an impact on this, or this is something that it's like very far along?
If we speak about women's problem, first of all, it should be professionals who can work with these problems. It should be centers, it should be hotlines, etc., any kind of mechanism, any kind of tools, how women can ask for help and inform about their problem, and be sure that they can get this kind of help. Because, for example, you live with your husband and you face this domestic violence day by day. How it's possible to go and to ask for help if he controls everything? That's the solution. That's the problem that is already solved in the countries where there's legal frames, and all this area is not hidden. It's open for conversation or participation. But when we speak about countries with regime, first of all, how to connect with these women, that's practice. And of course, it's support of these NGOs, it's education for people who can give this help. It's not only words about this problem, but it's also, you know, that the thing is that few years ago, there was big conversation in Russia if we need this special law against domestic violence or not. And Russia was the last country in Council of Europe without this law. And it was kind of pressure from European society that this law should be passed. But now Russia is not member of Council of Europe, so they even do not participate in this conversation. And there is no any international tools on political level. So the only thing what we can do is to think how to give these women help from, for example, women who, for a man who come from the war, because in last year, it's already more than 50 cases, 50 men who came from the war, and it was cases with injuries, with murders, with violence. So how to inform these women that they can ask for help if they live in the country, when they know that they should keep silence because they should be good wives? And of course, that's a question of information. And here we see this problem with independent media, with the lack of independent media. So of course, first of all, it's information. In second, it's people who can help and who can give this help on good level, professional help.
For sure, and obviously raising awareness about this topic is key. to
It
reach
is
more
information.
people.
It is raising awareness, of course. Yes.
Sure. Let's go to Latin America now, Katia. Quisiera hablar también sobre.
Katia, I would like to speak now about some of the legislative tools, frameworks that you have mentioned in Congress and that haven't necessarily received the government's support to be actually implemented. So are there any actions that now are working towards improving that? Have you identified any tools that have been effective in preventing online
Bueno, hay
gender-based
que
violence?
señalar en ese aspecto que hay
Well, first of
como
all,
dos realidades.
I'd
Una
like to mention that there are
realidad que
two
se
realities.
implanta desde el ámbito
The first reality
gubernativo con
that
un
is given
modelo
to us
cultural
from
y
the
social machista,
governmental aspect, the
instalando un
cultural
discurso
and
de
social
odio y de
aspect, which is
conservadurismo por
based
parte del
on
partido de gobierno, pero
conservatism,
hay que ver
hate,
también el
hatred, and
sentido de la esperanza, ¿verdad?
bravado
De la
and
lucha que están llevando
machism.
muchísimas
But there's
mujeres
this
en
other
Paraguay y en
reality,
la
the
sociedad
reality of
civil,
the fight, the reality of
intentando no
hope of this
retroceder, ¿verdad?
movement
La marcha del
led by
8M fue
women,
un
in which we don't
signo
want to go
evidente de
back.
una
The
organización, de una articulación muy
the
importante
protest on
donde
March 8th is
presentaron
a very
consignas, pero
important
además de eso,
day where we
también
can make
propuestas
visible our
alternativas, no
propositions,
solamente la
our
creación
alternative
de un
propositions, not only
sistema
the
de
creation
protección que
of
hoy está
a
funcionando por
protection
fuera del
mechanism, which
gobierno.
is now
El
working
día de
outside
ayer
and
nada más,
independent
en
from the
las noticias
government.
sale como
Just yesterday,
violando,
we saw
digamos,
on the
un
news
abusador, un acosador serial
that
que
a
manejaba una
serial
plataforma
stalker had
de voz,
access
¿verdad?
to
Una plataforma de
a
traslado, ¿verdad? Y
platform,
cómo unas
a
mujeres
flight platform,
organizadas
and
pudieron
organized women were
realizar toda la
able to do
investigación
all of
y
the
capturar
research
a un
behind it
agresor sexual.
and capture
No lo
a
hizo la policía,
sexual
lo hizo la
stalker.
ciudadanía, lo
And it
hicieron las
wasn't the
mujeres
police, it was
organizadas.
the citizenship,
Además
it
de
was
eso, hay como
organized women.
una serie de iniciativas como la
Besides that,
ley
there are
contra toda
some
forma de
initiatives, for example,
discriminación,
the law
que es
against
una
all types of
iniciativa que lleva ya
discrimination. This is an
tiempo,
initiative that
que era
has
muy, muy,
been in
muy
place for
consciente dentro de
several
distintas
years,
capas de la
and it
sociedad de
raises
que es necesario
awareness
derechos humanos,
at
que es
different
necesario
levels in
fortalecer
society
el
to show that
sistema
we
de
need this
alertas
tool. We need to
ante, digamos,
strengthen
la agresión.
the
Hoy
alert
tenemos un
system
Estado que
whenever there
actúa
is
de manera reactiva.
violence,
Uno
because
ve
now
en
we
la
live in a
prevención
state that
que
reacts.
únicamente
We do
tiene que
not work on
esperar que
prevention.
ocurra
We
un
just wait
hecho
for
así
something to
grave, que ocurra
happen,
una muerte para
for
poder
a
reaccionar.
murder to happen in
Sin
order
embargo,
to
es como
react
que en el
or act
Paraguay
on
hay un
it.
claroscuro y hay
In
una leve
Paraguay,
esperanza que se
there
abre a
is
partir
some
de la
hope,
articulación
however,
de
that has
algunos
come up
sectores
thanks
que todavía
to
son
the
minoría
connection
dentro
of
del
some
Congreso,
sectors, which are still a
dentro de
minority
una
within
bancada,
the
pero
Congress,
sobre todo dentro
but
de la
they
sociedad
are part
que se resiste a
of a bench,
aceptar
and they are
pasivamente
part
la realidad que
of
pretende
society that
imponer este gobierno
resist. They
autoritario,
resist
conservador,
against this
misógino, machista
conservator,
que hoy
uh,
estamos teniendo.
misogynist, and authoritarian regime that we have right now.
Cuéntanos de tu experiencia de primera mano.
Can
Creo
you
que
tell us a bit
nuestra
more
audiencia
about your
le va a interesar
experience
mucho. Tú fuiste
firsthand?
una
Because I think
senadora
our
en
public would be
Paraguay
interesting to know your
y
experience as a senator in
prácticamente quisiéramos
Paraguay.
saber pues tu
And
experiencia de
so
primera
we'd
mano.
like to
¿Cómo era tu
know
día a
this
día?
firsthand experience. How was
¿Cómo
your
recibías
day to
estos
day?
ataques por el hecho
How did you
de una
manage
mujer que se desempeñaba
these
en la
attacks
vida
for being
política?
a
¿Tuviste que
woman
cambiar quizá
participating in the public
tu
life?
conducta, tus
Did you have to
rutinas, la de
change
tu
your
familia, de tu gente
behavior or
cercana? Cuéntanos un
your
poco
routine,
de
your
tu
family?
experiencia de primera
How
mano
was your
como una
experience
mujer política de Paraguay.
as a politician woman in
Bueno,
Paraguay?
en realidad intentando no normalizar el
Well,
hecho de que
I
fuimos
try
objeto de
not to
violencia, hemos
normalize the
registrado
fact that we
varias
are target of
comunicaciones
gender-based
a
violence
diversos
in
organismos, fundamentalmente de la sociedad civil y centrados de
several
cuenta a través de nuestras propias redes
organizations
sociales,
of civil society.
intentando
We
no
were able
darnos ni cambiar,
to have
justamente
our own
porque
social media, to
finalmente el
not
objetivo
self-censor, and to
de
not
estos
change,
grupos
because the
políticos
purpose
es
of the
decabar el
political
ánimo,
groups
infundir
is to
miedo. Entonces,
undermine
en momentos como
our
estos,
our
nosotros es como
moods
que
and to
nos
be fearful.
parapetamos ante esta
So
realidad y decidimos
we
no
were just
censurarnos. Pero
we
eso es
decided
muy
to face this
es un
reality and to
costo
not
muy alto.
self-censor, but this
El
is
hecho de
very
tener,
difficult. It
digamos,
comes to a
que
very
afrontar
high
esto como si
cost
fuera,
because you need
digamos,
to
algo
confront
natural,
this
algo
as if
que
it were
tiene
something
solución,
natural,
something that has no solution. And what happens online, all violence online, as Saina and Anna mentioned, everything was linked to sexual aspects, to continually disqualifying our political thinking, our way to do politics, even how we dress, even how we behave in any message we want to transmit. And it's also important to highlight that just like it has its disadvantages, social media has advantages as well. And for example, in Paraguay, we don't come from a political party. I had to use social media platforms to be that candidate. So we do have this counterbalance exercise, and that's how we learned. We learned to use social media to benefit our cause and to expand our message to reach more youth, more women, and using this channel to convey a different message from the conservatism part.
Saina, I am assuming that, you are obviously involved in this space. You travel the world. You're now based in London. You've seen this from your home country. And I'm guessing that you are in contact with some networks, with some other organizations who are also following this very closely. What strategies have proven successful in fostering a better online environment? Some things that might be useful to perhaps share with other networks, with other organizations that can help to improve this issue?
Well, sadly, as I mentioned, I'm not optimistic. I'm now being very realistic. I think I'm not sure. Maybe Anna mentioned we are on our own. We are the enemies of everyone. Now imagine if you are a queer Palestinian woman who is using social media to advocate for human rights. She's gonna be suppressed literally by every single element and institution in the world. How can we give her a safe space? I don't think we can. What we've done in the region, and that was really on the grassroots level, is that we try to activate our personal kind of solidarity campaigns. When I see an Iraqi journalist being attacked because she published something against her society or exposing a sexual harasser, at least I would support her. I'm from a different country. I speak the language. I will get less attacks from the men of her country. So I can share the burden with her, at least in the public sphere, and she wouldn't feel on her own. But this is not systematic. This is not institutional. It's a very lonely journey, and it's very risky. Not just on the mental level, not just on the ambitious, on the work level, but also physically, because everything in our region could turn into a physical attack, even when we're abroad. So the kind of, if you are calculating the risks and the gains, there is no comparison at all. But at least it makes us feel that we're not on our own, because when you get attacked by so many parties, sometimes you question what you're doing. You question whether you are doing the right things. So it's only fulfilling this tiny kind of question in you that what you're doing and supporting human rights and being there and being who you are is something that's supposed to be the norm, and everything else is not. But sadly, I don't have any kind of strategy unless we really need to challenge those who are making the rules in the Silicon Valley.
Anna, the same question for you. You mentioned a little bit about raising awareness and the importance of having this in the public conversation and making people aware of these challenges that women are facing. What other strategies can you think of that could improve the digital environment for women?
I think that we can speak about in different words, but the meaning is the same. That first of all, we should give all women who face different problems the voice to speak about that. And secondly, and without that we cannot change anything, we should involve women in all this process, which it could be about legal frames, it could be about practical issues, but it's about people who participate in these decisions. It's about people who are not only know that they need to tell something about that, but they understand it. And of course, there are different strategies for each level. One level for people, another level for NGOs, third level for politicians, another level for people who communicate with each other when they speak about international politics, etc., etc. It depends on that. Each person can do something on their level, but the main problem which we have, I believe in, that usually when people understand that there is such problems that they can solve somehow without understanding what kind of problem is it. I can say that for sure that in Russia we have this example in very close understanding that, for example, when they discuss the question about abortion in Russia, they invite popes from Orthodox Church to speak how this legislation should look like. And of course, in this case, it's obvious that it's not okay, but in Russia, it's not obvious. But unfortunately, the same things happen on the level of UN, for example, or in other huge international meetings. So people who face problems, women who face problems should have tools to speak about that. And another question, another part, people who find solutions should know the topic, what they're working on. They should have not maybe their own experience, but of course they should understand. And of course, these women should participate in these decisions. Without that, we cannot change anything.
Absolutely. And Katia, nos has hablado de tu experiencia en Paraguay.
Katia, you shared with us your experience in Paraguay, but we'd like to know about your experience in Latin America, in this region, which we know that we see a lot of attacks against women participating in violence or candidates women. Is there a mechanism in which women are able to exchange experiences or come up with propositions for changes and take into account this common element that you all go through? Yes, so I think that in Latin America, what we have is a lot of networks. We have been able to connect and share in several spaces and to come together. It's important to mention, for example, on February 14th, I went through a very violent event. I was expelled from the chamber. There was a reaction to that, and there were some media outlets that published notes, and there was this follow-up on the mechanism of the Belén do Pará from the OAS. So the OAS sent out an alert about this, and other regional organizations published news about this. For example, Parla Azul, they did a solidarity call, but they didn't limit their work to listening. They were able to be seen because they took upon the public space. So they not only published many notes, but they made me feel like that we have a solidary ecosystem. We do have faced some backsliding, for example, in Argentina right now, where we see how there's a setback, or in Paraguay as well, although there is a very active resistance, and that's very important to mention as well. And of course, once we go deeper into one specific subject, it's very welcome. Democratizing education and having those educational programs that can help us in this process so that we can have a more positive impact in our society. Those are mechanisms that we try to continuously connect with other countries, for example, Chile, Peru, Paraguay, Argentina, So there is a activism, a very strong activism for this solidarity, for this sorority. So the region is very strong with that. Of course, thank you. And hopefully, once we analyze better this problem, we can create mechanisms to prevent the reality that many women share.
Been a very interesting discussion. I would like to offer the floor to our panelists for one last time, just for closing remarks, or if they want to share a final message with our audience. Zaina, I will start with you.
So I think for the women who are passionate about human rights and for the feminists, I think if you've seen any other women or queer being attacked on the social media, and you have the energy and the ability to interfere, I think this is our personal obligation. But for the international organization, I think more actual pressuring campaign towards the regulations of the social media elements and the kind of protection plans, not just supporting women and queer to take those spaces, but actually providing them with alternative and support when these spaces becomes so toxic and violating their safety. I think those two main elements.
Absolutely, very, very important. Anna?
I just can agree with what Zaina said. I want to add that international organizations and people with big sources can involve also celebrities in the topic, and we need to change our attitude to women's rights, not only in rights, I mean on paper, but the right to behave the way they want to have sex, not to have sex, to work, not to work, etc., etc. And of course, we need to change this understanding, this culture, how and what women should look like. And I believe that it starts from solidarity, and it's much easier to do something when somebody who you love, whom you know already made this. For example, we remember Me Too, and a lot of famous women participated in it. And I do believe that it can make changes on big scale. I do believe that this conversation for big audience can bring results.
And Katia, un mensaje final.
Katia, final message. Well, first of all, I would just like to thank the Wilson Center for inviting me to have this conversation, and huge solidarity to Zaina, to Anna, and thank you, Paulina, for the moderation. I'd like to close by saying that it's very important to highlight what's happening. In Paraguay, we have an authoritarian group, and we trust that the civil society will fight against it, will have will give a call out so that we can implement more integral measures so that we can have a more democratic space. We will continue to work, to collaborate, and to fight so that we do not have a setback in spaces that we have already conquered, thanks to the fight of many other sisters that were here before us. So we need to honor that. That is our generational responsibility, to honor and to address all of these new realities. So once again, thank you. And here I am to continue our work. As Benedetti would say, in spite of the setbacks of the past, we have the flowers of the present. Thank you so much, Katia.
Thank you, of course, to our panelists for joining us and sharing your experiences with us. Hopefully, these discussions will bring us closer to better protect women against online attacks and safeguard their right to fully participate in democratic life. And if I may, I would like to conclude with this quote of Madeleine Albright. She once said, "Success without democracy is improbable, but democracy without women is impossible." So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and stay tuned for more events for the Wilson Center. Thank you. Muchas gracias.